Hello again, Bee here, and welcome back to biology. We're still talking about cells today, but see if you can guess which kind. These are all cells, even though they look very different. In fact, they are all cells from the same organism. If a single organism has all these cells, we at least know that it must be multicellular, so it's not bacteria. I'll give you a hint. It's an organism you are very familiar with. You! These are all various types of human cells. Humans are classified as animals, and many of the cells you just saw would be almost identical to the cells found in other animal species. All animals are made of eukaryotic cells. These cells tend to be larger and more complex than the prokaryotic cells that we looked at last time. No surprise, I think we can all agree that humans are just a bit more complex than bacteria. More complex organisms need more complex cells. Our cells are bigger than prokaryotic cells too. In fact, on average, they are 10 times bigger. That means that the millimeter lines on the ruler would only hold 100 cells between them instead of 1,000. But that's still too small for our eyes, so we'll need a microscope. Well, there are a few cells we can see. Did you know that most eggs are considered to be a single cell? And an ostrich egg can be as big as 15 centimeters across. No microscope necessary there, but this is the exception, not the rule. Most cells are still microscopically small. Most organisms that are made of eukaryotic cells are multicellular, and the cells within one organism can be very different from one another and specialized to certain jobs. But there are a few unicellular eukaryotes that we'll look at in later lessons too. Here's a quick overview of what we'll learn today. We will compare and contrast bacteria and animal cells, and we'll explain the functions of major eukaryotic organelles. Scientific evidence suggests that eukaryotes evolved from prokaryotes, so it makes sense that they have many of the same parts. Eukaryotic cells are surrounded by a cell membrane, which controls what enters and leaves the cell, just like in prokaryotes. We can think of the cell membrane as being the gatekeeper of the cell. However, in animal cells, the cell membrane is the only layer. There is no cell wall or capsule like we saw in prokaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells have ribosomes. Remember our little protein factories? Still here, because all living things need protein. On most cell diagrams, ribosomes show up as seemingly insignificant little dots. But there's actually some complicated machinery in there, turning DNA into protein. You'll learn more about this process in a later unit. Eukaryotic cells also have DNA, because they need instructions to make the proteins. A major difference comes up here, though, as eukaryotic cells have a special storage place for the DNA called a nucleus. The nucleus is almost like a cell within a cell. It has its own membrane, the nuclear membrane, which is similar in structure to the cell membrane. In a prokaryotic cell, the DNA tends to clump together in the nucleoid, but it doesn't have the protective layer around it like eukaryotic DNA. The defining difference between a eukaryotic cell and a prokaryotic cell is that a eukaryotic cell has a membrane-enclosed nucleus to hold its DNA. Be careful not to get the nucleus of a cell confused with the nucleus of an atom. They share a name simply because they are the central, most noticeable structure of their unit, but cells are much bigger than atoms. A single eukaryotic cell contains trillions of atoms. You probably know what an organ is. No, not that kind of organ. Think of an organ in your body, like your heart, lungs, brain, just to name a few. Well, your organs are made of cells. And cells are like miniature bodies. They have their own organs. Since their organs are so small, we call them organelles. And they each have a specific job that helps keep the cell alive. You've learned about a few of the organelles in a eukaryotic cell already: the nucleus, cell membrane, and ribosomes. To keep track of all these organelles, it's helpful to think of a cell as a functioning city. The nucleus is like City Hall. This is where all of the big decisions are made and where all the important plans are kept. We've already said that the ribosomes are like factories, pumping out more and more protein every single second. What about all the other organelles in the cell? Let's start with the endoplasmic reticulum. Yeah, that's not a lot of fun to say. Usually we just call it the ER. No, not that ER. We can think of the ER as being the roads that the factories are on. In fact, do you see all the little dots on what looks like a complicated maze of streets? Those dots are the ribosomes, making protein. As they travel along the ER, the proteins finish being processed and folded so that they are ready for use. Next, the proteins and other molecules arrive at the Golgi apparatus, or just Golgi for short. This is like the post office. It packages and sorts molecules to be shipped. Some are sent to other locations within the cell, and some leave the cell to go to a different cell, just like how you can ship packages to someone in your own town or on the other side of the world. How does the cell have energy to do all this making, sorting, and shipping? The energy in your cells comes from another organelle, the mitochondria. The mitochondria is like the power plant of the cell, turning the food you eat into usable energy. Sometimes the cell has molecules it doesn't need anymore, but it may need some of the smaller pieces that make up those molecules. Have you ever built a big Lego sculpture and then gotten tired of it? What do? You tear it down and use the blocks to build another one. The lysosome is responsible for this task in the cell. It's the recycling center. It breaks down molecules the cell doesn't need, so it can use the building blocks of those molecules for other molecules. There seems to be a lot of coming and going in these cells, molecules moving from one organelle to the next, some molecules even being shipped outside the cell. How do they get there? They travel in another organelle called a vesicle. The job of a vesicle is easy to remember because it sounds a lot like another word, vehicle. Vesicles are literally the vehicles within the cell. They are membrane-enclosed sacs that protect and transport substances wherever they need to go. You'll learn more about a few other organelles in animal cells in the PDF, but we've covered some of the important ones here. Pause the video if you need to and finish filling out your notes for this section. Let's think back to those first 4 pictures of cells we saw today. Because animals are complex, multicellular organisms, they tend to have many different types of cells. This is called specialization, meaning that different cells have different jobs. The job of a blood cell is very different from the job of a muscle cell or even a bone cell. Can unicellular organisms be specialized? Well, they only have one cell, so that rules out the possibility of different types of cells. But what makes one cell different from another type of cell? For example, let's compare skin cells and muscle cells. We'll talk about these 2 types of tissue in more detail in a later unit, but for now, think about what might be different inside these cells. Skin cells make a protective layer, keeping water and other substances out of your body. Muscle cells are much more active, allowing us to run, jump, and lift heavy things. Which cells do you think would have more mitochondria, skin or muscle cells? Remember that mitochondria are the power plant of the cell. Obviously, muscle cells need more energy, so they have more mitochondria. That's just one way that cells can be different. Every cell in your body is perfectly adapted, with just the right organelles to do the job it needs to do to keep you alive. But what all of the cells that make up an animal have in common is that they are all eukaryotic, meaning they all have a nucleus that holds their DNA and other membrane-enclosed organelles that do specific jobs within the cell. In fact, when literally translated, the word eukaryote means having a true nut, the nut being an analogy for nucleus. Prokaryote means before the nut, because prokaryotes evolved before the nucleus. And there you have it, animal cells in a nutshell. Today, we compared animal cells to bacteria cells, and we looked at some of the major organelles in animal cells. But animals are not the only organisms that have eukaryotic cells. We can see from the diagram that animals are just one branch on the eukaryotic side of the tree of life. Next time, we'll look specifically at plants. And, spoiler alert, they have eukaryotic cells too. Until then, remember that biology isn't just science, it's the way of life.
Hey, hey.